Hey everyone. The only thing left for evolutionists to argue that the Earth is old is radiometric dating. And since it cannot get the dates of known ages correct, what makes us believe that it's reliable for rocks of unknown ages correct? Clearly, it is not only unreliable, but the fact that we know today that super heavy elements rapidly decay into stable radiometric isotopes that date millions or billions of years old, even though they were just formed, proves that radiometric dating is no longer evidence for evolution or anything else for that matter. It doesn't matter how consistent their decay rates become after it cools, because the early stages of their formation have shown us that they actually form rapidly from super heavy elements through the process of Z-pinch, where these elements are quickly fissioned and decay into subatomic particles, isotopes, and radioactive elements. Not only that, when they do form, they form in the arrangement of elements that matches exactly what we find on Earth's crust today, observed at the Proton 21 laboratories in Ukraine. Evolutionists claim that the Earth's radioactive elements came from material that evolved inside a star that exploded and the debris later formed to create Earth. But now we know stars cannot create any element above iron, so how could their theory be true? It can't. Evolution has been dealt its death blow regarding radiometric dating. But what about the Earth? They have been telling us that Earth's core has three main sources of energy, which are potassium, uranium, and thorium. If this is the case, then why don't we find more of it the deeper we go? Clearly, over billions of years, these heavy elements, like uranium, would be concentrated in the core. And if this were the case, then the oldest uranium would be at the core. And as it rises at the mid-Atlantic ridge, then logically, the closer you get to the ridge, the older the dating of the rocks would be. However, the exact opposite is true. The further you get from the ridge, the older the dates become. Now think about it. Over millions of years, uranium would have made its way into the core of the Earth. This would be the oldest uranium, as it would have taken the longest amount of time to get there. Then, it would have pushed its way up through convection at the mid-Atlantic ridge, and decay would have began as it cools. Therefore, the further you get from the ridge, the younger the uranium would date. Since we find the exact opposite is true, and the further away you get, the older the dates become, this is an invalidation of that theory. And now they admit that experiments show that there is no uranium or thorium at Earth's core. So the idea of the slow geologic process and the dates along the mid-Atlantic ridge prove nothing in regards to how old the Earth is. This is best explained by Noah's flood. As when the fountains of the great deep broke forth and opened at this location, the water currents pushed away from it these radioactive elements which settled into the newly formed rock layers. This also explains why 90% of the heavy elements uranium and thorium are on the crust of the Earth and not deep within the mantle. It also explains why lower rocks in the crust of the Earth date older than on top, since radioactive elements are dated older have more atomic weight. So we see uranium, which dates the oldest, in the lower levels because it weighs more, and the lighter elements on the top, which date much younger. So, if young Earth creation were true, then nearly all of the radioactive elements would be concentrated on the crust because of Noah's flood. If evolution were true and deep time, this would have allowed the elements to sink all the way into the core. What do we find? 90% of all radioactive elements are in the crust of the Earth. But if that's not bad enough, distribution is very uneven. 50% of all the radioactive elements are in Australia alone.
All the strange words make sense!
You see, Charles Lyell was a lawyer from England and a novice geologist, and he made up the geologic column that we have today. He did this with the intent of removing the biblical science from the education system, and it worked perfectly. Even though he made the entire thing up and admitted it, and Darwin took his work and expanded on it, the entire thing is based on a lie.
So here's the next question I have that I think is important. I've heard this being said by the critics quite a lot lately, Professor McQueen. So I'd like to get your thoughts on it, both you and George. So the critics claim that we cannot date rocks of known age because there has not been enough time for the decay of the parent isotope. And therefore, we would expect to get a wrong date. So in other words, they're saying that we shouldn't be looking to these examples of dates derived from rocks of unknown age because it's bad methodology. Is this just a rescue device, or what are your thoughts on this, gentlemen?
Yeah, it's a.
Can I just add a little bit to that? Well, Donnie, if that's the case, they should be giving a 0 date. If these things don't have the daughter elements, then they should be giving a 0 date.
And let me jump in here with one of my favorite comments. I never wanted to date rocks because I met Mrs. McQueen 50 years ago. I'd rather date redheads myself. But if you insist on dating rocks, you need to understand this diagram here. Remember that rocks, and I'll use RX for that, rocks are formed because of minerals. So let me hold it up to the screen here. You see rocks are formed of minerals. So actually what you're dating are the minerals inside the rock. The standard rescue device that the evolutionary community uses, Mount St. Helens erupts, or there's a lava flow in the Grand Canyon. And so when you go in to measure those minerals that I'm showing there, you're measuring minerals that are ancient. Even though the lava may have flowed out at in Hawaii, that lava, that basaltic lava, is going to carry minerals that have an old and give an old date. Now, there's quite a critique of that, but let's think of it like this. Let's imagine this pin here, as I move it across the screen, to be a motorcycle driving on the road in Hawaii back in the 1980s. And then let's pick up the Play-Doh and have the Play-Doh come over the top of this as a lava flow. So if we find a 1970 classic Harley Davidson inside this lava, what do we know? We know that this lava flowed out after 1970.
Yeah.
Because we got something we know that can be dated. So whether it's a motorcycle or a 55 Chevy that gets buried under one of these modern lava flows, it doesn't matter what the radiometric dating says. We know that it had to be after 1955 or after when the Harley Davidson was formed. And so that's one way to approach it. Now, exactly why the evolutionary community will say, you guys at Standing Truth have not properly covered isochron dating. You all have not properly covered the issue of this or that. These are rescue devices, which between now and Christmas, George and I can take a whole 2 hours on something like isochron dating and show the problems with it.
John, just slightly on a different sort of line here. This is a question, can the rapid formation of coal beds, oil and natural gas assist in removing much of the heat produced during the global flood? This is that old question about, the heat problem, the accelerated radioactive decay and whatever.
Yeah. You'll find that all chemical reactions either give off heat or they absorb heat, or the structures produced themselves will take up the heat and convert it either into pressure or they'll convert it into movement. So despite the claim that the world would have got too hot, this is in the ignorance, not the absence, but in the ignorance of other mechanisms that can convert heat into other things. Now, you ought to be able to remember from primary school where your brother would get you. You poor innocent young girl with long pigtails, he'd get your hand and he'd do a Chinese rope burn. Now, all he's doing is actually moving his hand around you, but that movement translates into heat. Now, you haven't destroyed the arm, you haven't done anything, but you've actually removed energy. And you'll find the same sort of mechanisms, not just the heat itself, but the heat converts into all sorts of other things, chemical reactions, exothermic, endothermic, movement of rocks, etc. We actually watched one day a dike form as the water underneath our stratometry just took off for reasons unknown to us, straight up through the sediments above. Now, that represents energy, represents movement, but it was all happening in the liquid itself, and it produced this massive structure that we would have said, that's a sedimentary dike. Must have been, yes, all of the theories went out the window.
And we know from experiments, John, that have been done by the CSIRO on oil formation, and many others have done experiments on coal as well, that it takes roughly 350 to 400 degrees Celsius to actually create that oil. So, yeah, so the formation of the oil.
Can I interrupt you there?
Yep.
What they're doing there is taking the organic chemist and making oil the way he does. Right now, if you do what we've done, you simply, like we've run lots of experiments. You'll see some of them listed on our website, in which you actually take what's actually in the real world. So that if I go and I look at a coal field, which is my special area of interest, I find that the best quality coal, and I gave a paper on this to the Sydney Coal Basin Conference, right? Because our best coal has a certain percentage of high grade kaolin, fine microscopic clay scattered throughout it. You see, if you get too much clay, the coal, it ruins your sort of burning equipment you want to put in it. But if you actually have this stuff microscopically spread through it, it acts as a catalyst and it gets to coal without even being heat. You say, how do you know that? The answer is we use clay in pottery. And clay is used because it has one interesting property. As you cook it higher and higher, that soft white clay, all of a sudden it goes hard. And you can put it on the side and leave it, and it won't go back to being soft. So clay has an irreversible structure change as you raise the temperature. Now, the case of the clay that's in the coal, it's about 200 degrees. So I'll be brutally blunt. The clay that's in the coal tells us it has never been as hot as all the local flood experts want it to produce this vast amount of heat. It's a catalyzed reaction. And the same is true for the oil and the gas. We have made all three using simple clay experiments with no temperature emissions of any great significance at all.
So what about all those dating methods for rocks? ratio of parent-to-daughter radioactive elements and get a rough time scale and even be able to guess as to how old that rock is. But these radio dating methods invariably give ages of millions to billions of years. The Bible says the Earth is only 6,000 years old. So do these radio dating methods contradict the biblical account of creation and the age of the Earth? In short, no. Take, for example, the Uinkaret lava flows which flowed into Grand Canyon. These rocks were dated using a battery of radio dating tests. 6 different potassium-argon tests were run, getting ages of between 10,000 years old to 117 million years old. 5 rubidium-strontium tests said the rocks were actually 1.27 billion years old to 1.39 billion years old. The lead-lead dating method said the rocks were in fact 2.6 billion years old. Rubidium-strontium isochron method said that no, the rocks were actually 1.34 billion years old. Rubidium-strontium isochron is supposed to be the holy grail of radio dating methods, not only to ascertain the age of a rock, but actually able to give us an indication of how accurate the age is, or if the rock has been contaminated. So which age is the correct age? We have a spread of ages different by a factor of 260,000. Well, rubidium-strontium isochron is supposed to be the most accurate of the methods, so let's go with that age. Oh, did I mention that there's Indian artifacts in the lava flows, therefore we know the lava is actually 800 to 1,000 years old? Oops. This is certainly not an isolated case. A typical old Earth geologist will reply with contamination. Well, obviously we have the wrong answer, therefore the sample must have been contaminated. Wait a minute, that's shooting yourself in the foot. The only reason you are claiming contamination is because we found out the actual age of the rock based on archaeology after the fact. How about all those rock layers that we can't verify the age of? That you've assigned an age of millions, perhaps billions of years to? How can we trust those ages? Bottom line is, we can't. In fact, multiple modern lava flows have been dated using radio dating methods, and invariably they came back with ages of millions to billions of years. Obviously something is horribly, horribly wrong. And by claiming contamination after the fact, you just demonstrated how quickly and easily you are willing to reject your own dates based on the scientific methods of radio dating, which give rock-solid ages. Wait a minute. Are the dating methods reliable or not? Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. In fact, geologists really do pick and choose whatever dates they want. Don't believe me? Just examine for yourself the radio dating history of the famous skull 1470. I covered this in part 21 of Complete Creation. Or check out the notorious dating of the famous Mars rock ALH 84001. When geologist Dr. Steve Austin from the Institute for Creation Research took samples of the lava dome that formed in Mount St. Helens in 1986, he had them radio dated using the potassium-argon dating method. He got ages of 340,000 to 2.8 million years old on rocks that were 10 years old. Well, Hanky and the folks at the No Answers in Genesis website just couldn't contain themselves, and they wrote, oh, I love this. Considering that the half-life of potassium-40 is fairly long, 1,250 million years, the potassium-argon method cannot be used to date samples that are much younger than 6,000 years old. A few thousand years are not enough time for argon-40 to accumulate in a sample at high enough concentrations to be detected and quantified. Did these guys stop to think before they wrote? Did they not realize that they just admitted, in print, that if the Earth is only 6,000 years old, that their radio dating methods will give a wrong, incorrect age of millions, perhaps billions of years? Did they not realize that they just handed over the entire debate on a silver platter to a guy wearing a pot on his head? Oh, they really shot themselves in the foot this time. Plus, their claim gets more and more preposterous when you examine it. They said there was not enough time for argon to collect. Well, actually, that wasn't the problem. That's like saying this glass of water actually only has 1 drop of water in it. But the amount is so small that our scientific equipment, which is insanely expensive, can't read that small an amount. That's why it shows the glass falsely as being full when in fact it only has 1 drop. What school did these guys go to? If your scientific equipment can't read that small an amount, it's going to read an amount of 0, not a full glass. If the potassium-argon method really worked, then it should show an age of 0 for the Mount St. Helens rocks, not many, many, many millions of years old. You've got it backwards, guys. Lastly, Henke just admitted in print one of the subtle assumptions you never hear about in radiometric dating, the assumption that the rock is millions of years old. Another subject you never hear brought up with radio dating is calibration. When a scientific method is developed, it is calibrated using known benchmarks. Well, when radio dating was invented, it was calibrated using the ages assigned to the rocks by evolutionary theory. Ages that were arbitrarily assigned. For example, in 1905, we knew that the dinosaurs were 8 million years old. In 1927, we knew that the dinosaurs were 30 million years old. In 1941, we knew that the dinosaurs were 150 million years old. Just as the ages of the dinosaurs and the rock layers that are in have changed over the years, so have the ages of the radio dating methods used to date those rocks. It's changed right along with our knowledge and what we know about the age of the rocks. If the radio date does not line up with the evolutionary assumptions, the radio date is assumed to be incorrect and it is thrown in the garbage. Radio dates are cherry-picked. It's just part of the system. In fact, in what has to be the ultimate irony, we can calibrate the radio dating methods. The Ewan-Carrot lava flows, the Mount St. Helens lavas, the Hawaiian lava flows, all of these lava flows can be used to calibrate radio dating methods. Yet, instead of accepting the obvious conclusion that a radio date of 1.3 billion years old really means the rock is only 1,000 years old, the radio dates are rejected out of hand with lame excuses. Why? Because we need millions and millions and millions of years for evolutionary theory to work. In fact, in my debate with Dr. David Kowarner from Northern Arizona State University, I had challenged him and offered to drive all the way down to Arizona so that he and I could take a sample of the Ewan-Carrot lava flows and put it through any radio dating test he wanted in order to calibrate and test the system. He declined. Could it be because he already knows that any radio dating method he uses is already going to produce an age which is incorrect by millions or billions of years? Look, you can call radio dating methods anything you want, as long as you don't use words, like reliable, trustworthy, scientific, or correct.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to hit that like button, it really does help, and subscribe if you enjoy the content and want to see more, and find more of us on our main channel on Team Standing for Truth. This is Matt Man. Until next time.